The sun was merciless, burning the earth beneath her. Chained to a wagon wheel, her white dress stained with blood and sand, she begged. Not for her life, but for the child inside her. Miles from water. No shade. No mercy. They left her to die. But something in the desert stirred. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches your heart, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something even more powerful just for you. Her name was Layla. Not the name her husband gave her, but the one her mother whispered into her ear before she was taken from the old village, where river reeds brushed her ankles and freedom still had a taste. At 17, Layla had never known war, but she knew the sound of boots. When they came for her, the men were dressed in desert black, carrying rifles and contracts. They spoke her father's name like a curse. Her family, fallen from power. Her marriage, payment for peace. Her new world was not one of love, but of control. The fortress she was taken to was carved into the cliffs, cold stone halls wrapped in silk and silence. There were no windows, only arrow slits in the walls. And at the center of it all, Malik Khan, her husband by decree. A warlord by blood, yet young, barely 25, but with eyes older than the mountains. He didn't shout. He didn't strike. But his orders carried a weight that broke people's backs. He spoke to her like she was a commodity. You are here to produce an heir. After that, your purpose will be decided. Each day she walked the courtyard in veils, watched by guards. She was given books to read, but none in her language. Food was served by silent women. Letters home were forbidden. But she watched. She listened. She noticed the soldier who limped slightly on his left side. Kale, the guard who looked away when she cried. She noticed the way the desert winds shifted before a sandstorm, how the doves flew lower just before sunset. She learned the rhythm of the fortress. And she waited. 3 months later, she felt the fluttering in her belly. A child. She was no longer a girl. She was a mother now. And that changed everything. She began to speak to the desert in her prayers, as her mother had once done. She asked it for strength. She asked it for a chance. But then came the whispers. That Malik was not the true heir to his father's empire. That another woman had once carried his child and had disappeared into the dunes. And when Layla asked questions, when she begged Kale for answers, Malik summoned her to the grand hall. His voice echoed in the silence. Loyalty, he said, is not born, it's enforced. That night, they dragged her from her chamber. She didn't scream when they chained her to the wagon. She didn't weep when they abandoned her at the edge of the salt flats. Because in her heart, she already knew the desert had heard her prayers. And it wasn't done writing her story. The desert was not silent. It hissed through the sand, rustled in the thorns, whispered in the bones of the earth. Layla lay against the scorching metal of the wagon wheel, her wrists raw where the iron dug into her skin. She no longer cried. There was no point. But this wasn't death. Not yet. Hours passed. The sun shifted. Her lips cracked. Her breath became shallow. She pressed her cheek to the sand, praying the earth would remember her mother's voice. And then she heard it. A crunch. A rhythm. Footsteps. She raised her head slowly, blinking against the glare. A figure emerged through the waves of heat, alone, cloaked, moving with intent. Not on a camel. Not in a vehicle. Just a man walking through the deadliest stretch of the salt desert like it was a garden path. He reached her. Kneeling down, he tilted his head. Beneath the hood was a face weathered by wind, with eyes the color of burnt cedar. Not a soldier. Not Malik's man. He spoke with an accent she didn't know. You are not meant to die here, he said. She tried to answer, but no sound came. Still, he understood. He pulled a curved blade from his belt. Not a weapon for war, but for carving roots or skinning game. With one clean motion, he sliced through her chains. Metal clattered against the wagon. Layla's body collapsed forward. He didn't catch her. Instead, he reached into a pouch and laid a wet cloth across her lips. She drank greedily, the water tasting of herbs and ash. Then came the question she hadn't expected. Do you want to return to them? She looked up, dazed. Her first instinct was fear. Was this another trap? Another hand of Malik, testing her resolve? But those eyes, they didn't ask for obedience. They asked for choice. No, she whispered. He nodded once. Then you must forget the life you had. Walk with me, or stay and wait for the vultures. She didn't hesitate. With trembling limbs, she pulled herself up. The pain in her abdomen warned her not to push, but her child still moved, still lived. They walked. For hours. Days maybe. Time dissolved in heat and wind. He never told her his name, but he showed her things, how to cup her hands around thorny plants to find moisture, how to read the shadows in the sand to know when something watched from beneath. He never touched her, never asked questions. But one night, as they rested in the hollow of a rock face, he finally said, "You're not the first he tried to bury, but you are the first to rise." That was when Layla understood. Malik had left a trail of silence across the desert. And this man, he wasn't just a wanderer. He was gathering ghosts. The next morning, they reached a place not found on maps, an old way station, long abandoned, buried halfway in sand. But it pulsed with quiet life. Women, a few children, scarred men, survivors, a hidden sanctuary. They didn't ask for her name. They gave her food, a mat to lie on, and herbs for the pain in her belly. As she lay down that night, her child kicking gently beneath her ribs, Layla felt something unfamiliar blooming in her chest. Not hope, not yet, but the beginning of resistance. The refuge had no name. It didn't need one. To the people who found it, or were found by it, it was simply after. After the chains, after the betrayal, after the life that tried to break them. Layla spent her first few days in silence. Her body healed slowly, but her mind wandered constantly. Every sound, every gust of wind, every whispered voice felt like it could unravel her. But even in silence, the world around her moved. And in it were others, each with stories of their own. Kale was the first familiar face she saw, the soldier with the limp. But here, he didn't wear a uniform. No rifle. Just worn linen, dust on his skin, and guilt in his eyes. He approached her one morning as she sat weaving palm threads near a shaded wall. "I didn't know they would leave you to die," he said, kneeling beside her. Layla didn't speak. She only looked at his hands, scarred, trembling slightly. "I tried to warn you. That night, I slipped herbs into the guard's tea. But I failed." She looked up at him. "Why are you here?" He gave a bitter laugh. "Because I refused to shoot a child. And in Malik's empire, that's treason." Kale became her quiet ally in the days that followed. He taught the younger children how to track lizards in the rocks. He carved small wooden birds and gave them to the girls who had forgotten how to smile. But Kale's past wasn't forgotten. One night, an older man named Rafik, one of the community's few elders, spoke up in the gathering tent. He was one of them, Rafik said, pointing at Kale across the fire. He carried their banners. "I saw him at the siege of Damer." Kale didn't deny it. "I did things I can't undo," he said quietly. "But I left. I turned on Malik when it mattered." Tension crackled like dry leaves. Layla stood up, her voice low but firm. "Then help me finish what Malik started." That was the night she was truly accepted. Aliyah, a healer who rarely smiled, took Layla under her wing. Tall and angular, Aliyah had once served as midwife to a royal household before being cast out for helping the wrong woman escape an unwanted marriage. Now, she was the quiet authority within the refuge, tending wounds, delivering babies, and making hard decisions. "You carry more than a child," Aliyah told her one evening. "You carry his name. That makes you a danger to all of us." Layla nodded. "Then teach me how to be something else." Aliyah's lips curled in something close to a smile. "Good. Then let's start with fire." By day, Layla helped gather water and grind herbs. By night, she learned the map of the region, its canyons, its dry riverbeds, the smugglers' paths only the sand remembered. She listened to the others' stories. Samir, a boy no older than 10, whose mother had vanished one night after soldiers raided their tent. Tariq, a builder with one arm, who created shelter from scraps and made people feel safe with nothing but his voice. Nasira, who taught Layla how to slip through shadows unnoticed, once a spy in Malik's court until her own sister betrayed her. They weren't rebels. Not yet. But they were seeds, scattered by war, rooting themselves in a place no army could find. Layla began to change, not just in her body, but in spirit. The girl who had once whispered to the desert now spoke to it with purpose. Her voice carried weight. Her steps carried direction. But there was one story no one spoke aloud. The story of the man who had found her and brought her here. He was called Kale's ghost, though that wasn't his name. He came and went like a shadow, vanishing for days, returning with maps, weapons, messages burned into scraps of cloth. Rumors said he'd once been Malik's brother. Others said he was a myth, a vengeance made flesh. Whatever the truth, one thing was clear. He was planning something. And now, Layla was part of it. The plan was never perfect, but it was bold. For weeks, Layla had trained with Kale and Aliyah, studied under Rafik, and followed Nasira through mock escape drills in the canyons. The goal: intercept a supply convoy headed for Malik's northern outpost. The caravan carried food, weapons, and most importantly, documents, codes, maps, and perhaps names. Layla would lead. Kale would handle explosives. Aliyah would await their return with a medkit and a signal fire. It was supposed to be a message: we're not hiding anymore. The morning of the ambush, Layla wrapped her stomach tightly in a band of cloth. The bump was undeniable now, her child pushing forward with quiet insistence. She whispered to them as the sun rose. I'm not doing this instead of being your mother. I'm doing it because I am. The desert, once a threat, now felt like an ally. It curved around her steps, softened her breath, and guided her through the low dunes. They reached the ambush point by noon. Kale rigged the choke point with a small explosive, enough to stall the lead cart, not destroy it. Tariq and Samir waited farther up the path with slings and signal mirrors. Layla crouched behind a crumbling ridge, her hand gripping a small dagger. The convoy appeared exactly on time. 3 camels, 2 covered wagons, 6 men, 1 woman. The blast hit the first cart as planned, sending up a burst of sand and panic. Men scrambled, shouting, blades drawn. Layla surged forward, her voice clear. Drop your weapons. They didn't. The woman, a veiled figure at the back, screamed something Layla didn't understand. Then, from the second wagon, a child leapt out. Young, confused, no older than Samir. Layla froze. She saw Kale hesitate too. That's when the arrows came. From the cliffs. From behind them. A double cross. It wasn't a supply run, it was bait. Within seconds, chaos erupted. Tariq was hit in the leg. Kale shouted for retreat. Samir vanished into the dust. Layla ducked behind a rock, clutching her belly as arrows struck all around her. The soldiers weren't Malik's standard men. These were trackers. Quiet. Deadly. Trained. One of them landed near her, sliding through the sand like a serpent. His blade flashed. Layla fought. The dagger Aliyah had given her bit into flesh, but the man only growled. He slammed her against the rock, her breath fleeing her lungs. She gasped, the world spinning. Then a gunshot. The man dropped. Blood soaked into the sand. It was Kale, limping, bleeding from his shoulder. Run, he screamed. She didn't argue. They scattered, vanishing into the narrow slits of the gorge. Layla ran until her legs burned and her vision blurred. By nightfall, only 3 of them had made it back to the refuge. Tariq was captured. Samir was missing. The convoy, untouched. And now they knew someone had tried to strike. But worst of all, Malik would know Layla was alive. The next morning, Kale slammed his fist into the side of the well. This wasn't a loss. It was a message from them. They knew we'd come. Someone told them. Aliyah's face darkened. We have a spy. Rafik said nothing. Just looked at Layla. Your child still lives? He asked. She nodded. Then you're already stronger than most. But the damage was done. The community was no longer hidden. The enemy knew they were organized. The sanctuary was compromised. They would have to move. That night, Layla stood by the edge of the outpost, looking out over the black dunes. The stars blinked coldly above. The wind whispered names she didn't yet understand. Her hand rested on her stomach. The plan had failed. Her people were scattered. But something inside her shifted, not fear, not grief. Something sharper. Resolve. The desert didn't mourn. It swallowed bodies, covered blood, silenced echoes. But it didn't grieve. And so, Neither did Layla, at least not at first. In the days after the failed ambush, the camp changed. There was no announcement, no great speech, just a quiet, shared understanding. They weren't safe anymore. Tents were packed. Supplies were split. Aliyah and Rafiq led the elderly and the children east, deeper into the dunes. Layla, Kale, and a few others would stay behind to mislead the search parties, destroy the evidence, and bury what couldn't be carried. This was no longer survival. It was war. But it wasn't rage that moved Layla now. It was something else. Something harder to define. She felt responsible. Responsible for Samir, still missing. Responsible for Tariq, likely imprisoned, or worse. Responsible for those who had followed her, believing she could lead. I never asked for this, she told Kale one evening, sitting by a fire no larger than a fist. He tossed another twig into the flame. None of us did. She shook her head. But they look at me like I'm a torch. Like I'm going to lead them through the dark. Kale looked at her, eyes soft. You already did. That doesn't mean the path won't burn. As they dismantled the last remnants of the outpost, Layla found herself walking different paths, emotionally, spiritually, even physically. She no longer waited to be told what to do. She made choices. She gave orders. She helped heal. And she began to dream again. Not of Malik. Not of vengeance. But of names. A name for her child. A name that meant peace, but also fire. A name no one could chain. The world responded to her change, slowly at first. Aliyah, once cold and clinical, began to ask Layla's opinion on medical decisions, treatments, rations, who should move, and when. Nasira opened up one night about her betrayal, her fear that her own sister still served Malik, gathering names. Even Rafiq, who had been wary, began calling her daughter of dust. Not as an insult, but as a title. Layla began carving names into small stones, stones she buried where friends had fallen. She taught others to do the same. Not graves, not markers, just memory. The desert couldn't grieve, but they could. Then a shift. One evening, as the sun bled out over the horizon, a scout returned breathless. I saw them, he whispered. Soldiers, 5 days west, headed toward the canyon, our old camp. He paused, and a child was with them. Layla's chest tightened. Samir? The scout nodded. He looked alive, but not free. It was the first spark of hope they'd had since the ambush. The group erupted into argument. Some wanted to rescue him immediately. Others said it was a trap, that Samir might be bait again, that he might have already talked. Layla listened, then raised her hand. We move, but not with fire, not with weapons. We watch, we wait, and when we're sure, we strike, quietly. No one argued. She realized, in that moment, something had changed, not just in her, but around her. They trusted her. She was no longer the girl chained to a wagon. She was something else now. The desert hadn't saved her just to survive. It had chosen her to lead. That night, as she lay under the stars with a hand on her stomach, she whispered softly, You were made in fire, but I will give you a world of wind, where your voice is free, where no one ever owns your name. The desert, silent and endless, seemed to listen. And somewhere beneath the dunes, it shifted. The rescue was supposed to be simple. 3 scouts had tracked the soldier convoy for days. They moved in predictable loops, set up camp near the dried riverbed every 3rd night. The child, Samir, was with them, still alive, still walking. But something was wrong. He never tried to run, never signaled, never cried. Layla insisted on being part of the retrieval team. She knew his eyes, his posture, his soul. She would recognize if he was in danger. Under moonlight, they crept forward. Kale flanked right. Aliyah waited with horses beyond the ridge. Layla approached the camp alone, heart pounding, breath shallow. Every step screamed trap, but she pushed on. Then, she saw him. Samir. He was seated near the fire. Tired. Thin. But alive. He saw her. And didn't react. Layla crouched low and whispered, Samir. It's me. He blinked. You shouldn't have come. The hairs on her neck rose. Why? She asked. He looked away. Because they let me go? On purpose. Before she could move, boots crunched behind her. A voice, smooth, amused, Familiar. Cut through the dark. You always did have poor timing, Layla. She turned. Malik. No guards. No army. Just him. In black desert robes. Clean. Calm. Smiling. You survived, he said. I knew you would. I wanted you to. Layla reached for her dagger. Malik raised a hand. Please. Not in front of the boy. She glanced at Samir. The child's face was unreadable now. Too calm. Too trained. Malik stepped closer. Tell me something, wife. How long did you think your little rebellion would stay hidden? Long enough to free them. He laughed. Soft. Almost sad. Free them? Layla, they brought you to me. Half the elders in that village handed you over. Because they feared your name more than mine. Layla's blood ran cold. You're lying. He tilted his head. Am I? Ask Rafiq. Ask Aliyah. Ask anyone who's known your family longer than you've been alive. You were never meant to lead. You were meant to burn, quietly. Controlled. She shook her head. Malik crouched beside Samir and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. He's quite brilliant, you know. Watched every move you made after the ambush. Brought me names. Routines. Maps. I didn't train him. You did. Samir looked away. The betrayal cut deeper than any blade. Why? She asked the boy. He whispered. They told me you'd get us all killed. Malik stood. You want a war, Layla? Fine. But at least understand, the only reason you're alive is because I chose to let you live. Then he walked into the shadows, leaving silence in his place. Layla collapsed to her knees. Samir ran. She didn't follow. Back at camp, her hands trembled as she repeated Malik's words. Rafiq stared at the fire. Silent. Kale clenched his fists. He's playing you. But Aliyah's voice was the one that broke Layla's heart. He's not wrong. Layla turned to her. What? Aliyah hesitated. Your mother was a threat. The elders feared she'd rise again through you. Some of them agreed to the marriage. The truth hit like a storm. Layla was never a mistake. She was a sacrifice. Her bloodline. Her name. Her child. All pieces on a board others had been playing for years. She wasn't just fighting Malik. She was fighting the ghosts of her own people. Silence. That's what Layla remembered most when the truth sank in. Not screams or shouts. Just silence. Like the breath before a sandstorm. The camp didn't fall apart in chaos. It came undone quietly. Thread by thread. Layla stood in the center, feeling the weight of every stare. They knew. Some had always known. Others had only guessed. But now it was out. She had been traded. Not rescued. Not chosen. Sacrificed. Kale was the first to break. Not with anger. Not with betrayal. But with motion. He packed his weapons, gathered his maps, and walked toward the canyon alone. I'll find another way, he muttered. This isn't my war anymore. Layla reached for him. Please, don't do this. He didn't stop walking. I followed you because I believed. But if they sold you out, Layla, what are we even fighting for? She didn't have an answer. Aliyah became colder. Not cruel, but clinical. She stopped asking for Layla's advice. Stopped looking her in the eye. That night, as they packed supplies, Aliyah spoke without turning. You think just because you were betrayed, you're special? Layla blinked. What? Half of us were betrayed by our families. That's why we're here. Layla stepped closer. Then help me. Don't shut me out. Aliyah finally looked up. Her face wasn't angry. It was exhausted. I am helping. By reminding you. This isn't about your pain anymore. It's about survival. Then she walked off, leaving Layla in the dark. Rafiq drank. The old warrior who had always stood tall now sat hunched by the fire, sipping from a worn flask. I knew. He confessed without being asked. Layla didn't speak. I was there when they signed the pact. Your father, he begged them not to. But they'd already decided. You were currency. A way to keep Malik quiet. She sank beside him. Why didn't you tell me? He chuckled bitterly. Because I thought you'd die fast. I thought the fire in you would burn out before the world could smother it. He looked at her, his eyes wet. But you didn't die. You lit the damn desert on fire. Samir wouldn't come near her. He stayed in the far tent, eyes down, arms crossed. He'd stopped speaking completely. Layla tried once, just once, to reach out. She brought him a carved stone. His name, etched in careful curves. She left it at the tent's edge and whispered, I don't blame you. I just want to understand. He didn't take it. The next morning, it was gone. But whether he kept it or tossed it into the dunes, she never knew. And Layla? She broke, differently. Not with rage, not with tears, but with stillness. For 3 days, she barely moved. She didn't eat, didn't speak, didn't lead. She just sat on the ridge, watching the wind carve patterns in the sand, trying to decide if her life had ever belonged to her at all. She thought of her mother, her father, her unborn child, and the terrible, growing fear that maybe she was never meant to survive. Maybe the desert hadn't saved her. Maybe it was just waiting to bury her too. But the storm hadn't passed. It was only gathering. Because far beyond the dunes, Malik was moving. And his final game hadn't even begun. On the 4th morning, she woke before the sun. For the first time in days, Layla's fingers moved with purpose. She braided her hair back tightly, cleaned the edge of her blade, strapped on her boots without shaking hands. She still didn't speak much, but her silence had changed. It wasn't hollow anymore. It was sharp. By the time the others stirred, Layla had already sketched a map in the sand, rivers, ridges, choke points. Kale's absence was a wound they all felt, but it wasn't fatal. They had survived worse. Aliyah approached, arms crossed. So, you've decided to rise from the ashes? Layla didn't look up. Not ashes. Embers. Aliyah's brow lifted. What's the plan? Layla stabbed a finger into the sand. We stopped chasing Malik. That caught Rafiq's attention. We're giving up? Layla shook her head. No. We let him chase us. In the days that followed, Layla worked like someone reborn. She moved through the camp with quiet authority, not demanding obedience, but earning it. Every strategy she laid down came with intention. Malik wanted her afraid, reactive, so she'd become unpredictable. They stopped attacking convoys. Instead, they began spreading false routes, burned tracks, fake markers, empty camps. Malik's men would waste days chasing shadows. And in the meantime, Layla built alliances. She and Aliyah rode north, through canyon passes that hadn't seen rebellion in years. They met the Bone Sisters, mercenaries once loyal to Malik. Layla didn't beg for help. She offered a new future. We're not fighting Malik, she told them. We're cutting out the rot that gave him power in the first place. That phrase stuck. By the end of the week, they had 30 new blades at their back. Rafiq began training the younger fighters. He still drank, but only after sundown. At sunrise, his voice rang across the cliffs, barking drills like a general of old. Layla noticed a fire in his eyes she hadn't seen in years. Not the fire of vengeance, the fire of purpose. And Samir? Still silent, still distant. But Layla didn't push. She left small signs for him, folded cloth to keep the sun off his neck, notes etched in stone about stars, winds, and tracking paths. One day, she found a piece of her map corrected in red chalk. His handwriting. He was watching, listening, healing. On the 10th day, the scouts returned with word that Malik's forces had split, some chasing rumors in the west, others doubling back toward the southern trade route. Layla gathered her commanders at dawn. We strike the gate at Varak, she said simply. Aliyah's eyes widened. That's the old slave route. Layla nodded. Where the chains began. Rafiq frowned. It's a fortress now. You'll never take it. I don't plan to, she said. I plan to open it. The confusion was instant. But Layla continued. Varak is symbolic. It's where he processed us, where he learned to profit from fear. If we break it open and let the captives walk free, we don't just weaken him. We erase his myth. Aliyah whispered. That's not just strategy. That's a message. Layla nodded. No more running. No more hiding. We'll turn the place of our bondage into a beacon. They spent 2 weeks preparing. Messages were carved in bone and scattered to old rebel cells. Weapons were smuggled through underground aquifers. Samir, for the first time, stood beside her while she planned. He still didn't say much, but when Layla handed him a small blade, he held it steady. The night before the assault, Layla stood on the ridge once more. Not broken, not hunted, just still. Below her, the fires of a new rebellion burned steady. She placed a hand on her swollen belly and whispered, You'll be born into a world we build, not one they break. And in the quiet hush of wind, It almost sounded like the desert whispered back. Then build it strong. They slipped through the lower tunnels beneath Varric just before dawn. The assault was fast, brutal, and precise. Smoke filled the old slave chambers. Fire licked the fortress gates. And then, for a heartbeat, victory felt possible. Layla reached the center courtyard, heart pounding as the gates crashed open. Dozens of captives spilled out, blinking against the rising sun. Their chains clattered like thunder. She turned toward the final stronghold, Malik's tower, only to find Rafik standing in her way. His blade was drawn. Layla froze. Rafik. His eyes didn't meet hers. You weren't supposed to survive the desert, he said quietly. Wind howled through the broken stone around them. You're working with him, she whispered, stunned. I was working for us, he snapped. You think this army of outcasts stands a chance without backing? Malik offered security. I took it. For all of us. Layla's voice cracked. You sold us. He stepped forward. I saved you. He would have killed you in the sand. I convinced him to let you live. You were pregnant, Layla. Tears pricked her eyes, not from fear, but from the truth. You let them chain me. Rafik's voice softened, almost pleading. It was the only way. Her hands shook as she reached for her blade. Then you're worse than him. You knew what those chains meant. Behind them, the tower door slammed open. Malik stepped into the courtyard, his face calm. Rafik didn't look at him. I begged him not to kill Kale, he said, barely above a whisper. He didn't listen. That broke something. Kale, her only friend, her final lifeline, gone. And Rafik, her protector, her last family, had been the one holding the door open. Layla closed her eyes, then opened them sharper than ever. I'm not yours to save. With a single, fierce cry, she lunged, not for Rafik, but for the broken well behind him. Her blade sparked against the chain holding the gear shaft. A deep grind echoed. The tower's structure buckled. Water exploded upward, gushing through the courtyard, turning ash and dust into flowing mud. It would drown the lower chambers. Wipe away everything. Malik shouted orders. Rafik grabbed her wrist. You'll kill us all. Layla's gaze didn't waver. Then we die free. She pulled away and vanished into the rising flood. The waters of the collapsing fortress swirled like an unstoppable tide. The mud crawled up the crumbling walls of Varric, a once mighty citadel now sinking beneath the weight of its own blood-stained history. Layla's pulse hammered in her ears. She moved fast, her breath shallow. There was no time to hesitate. There were no second chances. Behind her, the walls were crumbling, and before her, Malik's forces scrambled to regain control. But it was all too late. The water had breached the gates. Her heart thudded as she climbed higher up the tower steps. Every part of her ached, her body heavy from the toll of endless days on the run. But in her gut, there was something burning, something that kept her feet moving, even when the world seemed to be falling apart. The sky above her was darkening. Smoke from the burning wreckage of the fortress stung her eyes, but she didn't flinch. She couldn't afford to. Every step toward the tower was another step closer to her destiny, her reckoning. At the top of the tower, Layla paused for a single breath. She could see Malik's men scurrying below, struggling to salvage what was left. But it wasn't their survival that mattered anymore. Malik had promised them all power, and now that power was slipping through his fingers, just like it had for her. Her mind raced. Where was he? And then, she saw him. Malik stood at the edge of the ruined courtyard, his back to the rising floodwaters. He wasn't shouting orders anymore. He wasn't the confident, ruthless man who had once ruled over her. No, he was something else now, cornered, desperate, vulnerable. But that only made him more dangerous. Layla's fingers brushed the hilt of her blade. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times. In every dream, in every nightmare, she had seen herself facing him. But now that the moment was here, it felt different. It felt raw. It felt real. And the weight of her pregnancy only made the stakes higher. She couldn't afford to fail. With one last breath, she stepped forward, her voice ringing out across the courtyard. Malik. He turned slowly, his eyes narrowing. There was no fear in them, only cold calculation. He was still the predator. She was just the prey. You, he sneered, are a fool. Layla didn't flinch. No, I'm your end. He laughed, the sound hollow, as if he was trying to convince himself. You think you've won? You think the people you've freed will follow you? You have nothing left. No one left. This is where it ends, Layla. She took a step closer. Not yet. Malik's expression darkened. You think you're a hero? You think they'll remember you as anything other than a savage? His words were sharp, but they didn't pierce her anymore. They didn't have the power they once did. I don't care how they remember me, she said, voice steady. I care how I remember you. And then, before he could react, she lunged. The world slowed as they collided in the midst of the ruins. For a moment, it was just her and him, clashing in the heart of the broken empire, where everything she had fought for, everything she had lost, would come to an end. Layla knew this would be the final test. Everything, her past, her pain, her future, was tied to this moment. The stakes were higher than they had ever been. And now, with Malik at her mercy, she could feel the weight of that choice. The clock was ticking. The floodwaters surged. The battlefield was a place where no one could escape unscathed. The tower crumbled beneath them. The sounds of chaos below, the rushing waters, the screams of Malik's soldiers, faded into the background. In this moment, there was only the heat of battle, the sharp edge of her blade, and the weight of everything Layla had lost. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her grip on her sword remained steady. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times, but now that it was here, there was no room for hesitation, no room for doubt. Malik's eyes narrowed, his hand reaching for the hilt of his own sword. You don't understand, Layla. You think you're better than me? You think you can change everything. His voice was calm, almost cold, but there was something in his eyes, something that betrayed the facade of confidence he had worn all these years. Layla had seen it before in the moments when he thought no one was looking. Fear. He was afraid. Afraid that the empire he had built was crumbling, and with it, his power. No, Malik, Layla said, her voice strong. I don't want to change everything. I just want to take back what you stole from me. She advanced, every step purposeful, every motion driven by the fury of the years she had spent in captivity, the pain of betrayal, and the crushing weight of the life she carried within her. Her baby, her future. Malik's sword clashed against hers, a harsh sound that echoed across the broken courtyard. He was fast, too fast for most. But Layla had learned his rhythm. She knew his moves. She had fought this battle 1,000 times in her mind, and now it was real. Their swords locked in a moment of silence, their eyes meeting. I gave you everything, Malik shouted, his voice cracking with a mix of anger and desperation. I spared you. I let you live when I could have let you die in the desert. You owe me. You don't get to decide who lives or dies anymore. Layla spat, pushing him back with all her strength. I don't owe you anything. You took everything from me, my family, my hope, my future. You stole my life. With one final, forceful blow, Layla knocked Malik's sword from his hand. It clattered to the stone floor, and for a moment, the world was still. He stepped back, his chest heaving, eyes wide with disbelief. You're nothing without me, he hissed. Without me, you're nothing. Layla's heart clenched. She had been nothing to him. To Malik, she had been an object, something to control, something to use. But now, she was a force of her own. Her pain had forged her into something stronger. Without you, Layla said, stepping forward, I am everything. And with those words, she moved in for the final strike. This time, there was no hesitation. She didn't need to look back. She didn't need to ask herself if this was the right choice. Her blade found its mark. Malik gasped, his eyes wide in shock, as the tip of her sword pierced his side. He staggered, and for the first time, Layla saw something in his eyes that he had never shown her before, regret. It was fleeting, but it was there. He fell to his knees, his breath ragged. His empire, the world he had built on blood, betrayal, and fear, was crumbling. And now, Layla had brought it down. She stood over him, her body trembling from the fight, her heart heavy with the weight of what she had just done. But there was no joy in the victory, only the hollow ache of everything she had lost and everything she had gained. You were wrong about me, Layla whispered, her voice steady but filled with emotion. You thought you could control me, but I'm not your possession. I never was. Malik's eyes flickered one last time before they closed, and his body slumped forward. His reign, his empire, everything he had ever fought for, had ended. The sound of the floodwaters rose around her, crashing through the broken gates, as if the desert itself had claimed its final victory. Layla sank to her knees beside his body, her sword clutched tightly in her hand. The storm raged around her, but within her, there was only stillness. She had done it. She had freed herself, and in doing so, had freed those who came after her. But the cost had been high. The world would never be the same, and neither would she. The storm raged outside, but inside, the ruins of the citadel had fallen silent. The only sound was the distant rumble of the waters, rising, relentless, consuming everything in its path. Layla stood alone in the heart of the broken fortress, the weight of the sword heavy in her hands. She had expected the world to feel different once it was all over. The victory, the justice, the revenge. But now, with Malik gone and everything in ruin, the silence felt suffocating. She hadn't expected to feel so empty. Her body was exhausted, aching from the battle and the toll of carrying a life within her. Her hands trembled slightly as she looked down at the blade, the tool that had ended Malik's reign. But it wasn't the sword that had truly ended him. It was her. Everything she had fought for, everything she had lost. Had it all been worth it? The pain, the suffering, the years of captivity? For a fleeting moment, doubt crept into her mind, but she shook it off. Her eyes fell to the ground beside her, where Malik's body lay, lifeless. He had been the monster she had always feared, the one who had stolen her freedom and tried to erase her will. But now he was gone, and all that remained were the echoes of what had been. She placed the sword on the cold stone floor, kneeling beside it, and let out a long breath. The desert had taken so much from her, but it had also given her strength she hadn't known she possessed. It had shaped her, hardened her, until she became something she hadn't recognized, but something that could survive. She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision that had led her here. She had killed the man who had held her captive, but the desert had taken more than just him. It had claimed her family. It had taken the innocence of her youth. It had stolen her dreams and replaced them with the cold, unyielding reality of survival. But it had also forged her into something else, something unbreakable. A voice echoed through her mind, the voice of the people who had fought beside her. Zion's gentle encouragement, Aliyah's unwavering loyalty, Rafiq's silent determination. These were the faces of her future, faces of people who would build a new world, one that wasn't defined by the cruel empire Malik had built. She wasn't alone anymore. The waters outside had reached the gates now. The citadel would soon be swallowed by the flood. Layla could feel the ground shaking beneath her feet, but she didn't move. She stayed where she was, her body still as the storm raged around her. Was this really the end? Layla had killed Malik, but his empire was far from over. It was a system built on centuries of power, violence, and fear. The desert had taught her that nothing lasts forever. Nothing is ever truly finished, no matter how hard we fight. The thought of the new world she would help build came to her slowly, like a whisper on the wind. It was daunting. The weight of her responsibility was heavier than anything she had ever carried. But there was hope now, hope she hadn't felt since the moment she'd been chained to that wagon. She thought of the life inside her, the child she was about to bring into this world. This child would never know the horrors of Malik's reign. This child would be raised in a world where their mother was free, where they would be loved. And yet, the question lingered. What kind of world would that be? The storm outside seemed to pause for a moment, as if waiting for her answer. The waters surged, pushing against the walls, but Layla knew that this moment was hers alone. She could leave. She could walk away from this place, from the memories, from the pain. But as she stood there, one last thought tugged at her heart. Her eyes swept over the wreckage, the ruins of an empire that had oppressed so many. It was not enough to walk away. She had to rebuild. She had to stand for those who could not. She couldn't let Malik's legacy remain. The floodwaters would wash away everything in its path. But there was one thing they couldn't take: the memories, the stories of the ones who had fought with her. Zion, Aliyah, Rafiq, and so many others who had fallen in their fight for freedom. Their sacrifices would never be forgotten. As the floodwaters began to breach the walls of the citadel, Layla stood tall. She wasn't sure where the road ahead would take her, but she knew one thing for certain. She was no longer the woman she had been when she first entered this place. She had faced her fears, faced the darkness inside her, and she had emerged stronger than ever. In the end, it wasn't the desert that had saved her. It was the courage she found within herself.